Got it. Okay, great. And here we are. Okay, I'm going to hand the phone to him and let me swap it around. Okay, so welcome to my kitchen. That's where I usually do my dyeing. And I'm going to show you real quick a couple of things. First, we're going to start with dyeing of like nylon or basic Form 2 plastic. So this, you usually want the dye to be heated up. So I usually work, when I work in my kitchen, I clear away all food related stuff, and I use pans that I have specifically bought for this. I buy them at like thrift stores. Don't use food in a pan that you've done dye with. Okay, so we've got a pan here, and then we'll mix it up. I'm going to use iDye poly. Hang on a second. My iDye poly is actually in my backpack, which is where I left it, thinking I was going to do it the other day. All right. Super important, gloves. All right. By the way, guys, if you have any questions, just jump in with it, because I can't see the Zoom. Obviously, David's holding the phone, and you could just, you know, pretend that we're all in the same room. So I always wear gloves with dye. I use iDye poly. Well, you can also use RIT dye. No matter how you whatever it is you use, you want to have gloves. And actually, a lot of this stuff is kind of toxic. So make sure that, again, like I said, keep it away from food. But the cool thing about iDye poly, first of all, it's designed for synthetic fabrics. So it works great on the plastics that we use for 3D printing. The other thing is that it comes in a lot of dye. Like this will probably do, you know, I don't even know how much. Yeah, they say to fill a stainless steel or enamel pot with enough water for the fabric to move freely. So you could look at like a gallon of this stuff. And because it can dye up to like 3 pounds of fabric. I usually use a little tiny bit at a time, and I use it in hot water. So I'm going to mix up some of this, and I'll show you how I do this. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that they ship it in these little packages that dissolve in water. So what I do is I grab a Ziploc after I open it up, and it always stays in the Ziploc. I don't handle this without gloves, because the powder gets all over the place. The powder is in the, it gets all over the boxes. I keep all of my dye in a big Ziploc, and it lasts for years. Some of this stuff I bought while I was still in school, like years ago. So it lasts for a long time, which is good, because then you can share with your friends. So I'm just filling this up a little bit. If you want to look, I'm going to put it over here. I've got a little burner here. I'm going to start to heat it up. I should have had it heated up already before we started, but all right. So I've got my purple dye here. I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to pull out that little, I'm going to work over the counter here so it doesn't get on the floor. Fortunately, my counters are easy to clean, but how well does it go through? Yeah, okay, good. I'm not sure how well it focuses. Gotcha. So you can see, yeah, it's already starting to dye my gloves. And I keep a pile of gloves around when I'm working on dye. And you can see here, this all came out of that piece, you know, this, and there it goes. Looks like black powder. I'm going to put some of that into the dye pot. So, excuse me, move over here. And I'm just going to do this. We can see how it's not a lot. You don't really need a lot. Like I said, you can, this can last for years. What's really cool too is you do not have to throw away the dye every time you do this. I usually put it into a mason jar or an old pickle jar. I save like glass jars. It should be a glass jar. So here we go. I sealed it back up, and you can see I still have the stuff on my gloves. I'm gonna knock that in. And you can even see that I got some of the powder on one of the other containers. Now I'm gonna put this back into here. So did you guys see it's iDye poly? There is also iDye. This is a Jacquard product. There's also regular iDye. Regular iDye is meant for natural fabrics. It's not going to work very well on your 3D prints. So when you do buy the dye, make sure it's iDye poly. Or the RIT dyes, you should make sure that they're set up for synthetic. I don't use RIT, but I know that a lot of people do use the colored RITs, the liquid. All right, so I'm going to put all these back in here. Meanwhile, this is heating up. I am going to get, I have a whole set of toothbrushes and paint brushes that I use specifically for this dye stuff. And that's over here. Let me grab these. All right. Actually, not that one. So here's what you can see, that they've been through a lot of dyeing. This works best with when the dye is warm. So I'm going to dye this piece. This is Form 2 clear. It's just a test piece that I was using over at the Tacony lab where I also work. And actually, I picked this up with the powder all over it from my hands. Doesn't look like it did anything, but that's one of the things that you want to be careful of. So I'm going to take these off before I start handling my parts. I'm also going to wipe this counter again, because working clean is super important. Okay. And look at that. It didn't look like there was anything on that counter, but look at it. And I should have had a glove on because it's already bleeding through the paper towels. So let me throw this away. And let's see. All right. Yeah, wow. Whew. This is why you shouldn't have any food stuff out when you're working. Okay. Yeah, look at that. Okay. We're starting to steam. I'm going to grab another set of gloves. And oh, I think I forgot my tweezers are downstairs. Oh well. It's all right. I'm going to use a fork actually to move the piece in and out. So I've got some clean pieces here. These are nylon. That's one of the materials that you guys might want to consider for your next piece. These are actually, you know, I've got an earring post in them, but this is how I usually do. I usually glue the earring posts in place and then I dye them. And we're also going to work with the Form 2 piece that I showed you. And we're just going to do a real quick dye demo because I also want to talk to you about painting and finishing as well. Any questions so far? Nope. Okay. All right. I'm going to turn down the dye. We can see that it's starting to boil. We probably don't want it to do that. I should have my exhaust on. I'm going to turn it on, but I think it may affect our, if you're doing this at home, use a window, open your window, turn on your exhaust. I'm going to shut that off. That's just too much.
We can open the windows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to just open the door then.
Good.
All right. Because it's not good to breathe this stuff. When you're doing it at school, we have a little hot plate and you should be working in the fume hood with any dyeing. But you also want to be like super careful. You have to work super clean. But here it is. I turned this down because I don't want it to completely boil, but I do want to show you how quickly it works once it's hot. Excuse me. So there's that. If you're working in school, you should have a pot of clean water too nearby. But over here at home, I'll do it with the sink. But let's look at this here. I don't know how well you can see the color.
Oh, yeah.
Let me put my, yeah. So it comes out pretty quick. I'm gonna go and I set up several paper towels so that I can just lay things on them. It's good to see what it looks like against the white. I really love this purple. In case you guys didn't know, it's my favorite color. So I'm gonna put this in. I often use like a dip dye technique. There we go. I'll do like one side. Let me rinse it. Okay, because you want the dye to stop working. It's hot. And I can just dip the other side too, maybe not as long. And there's you can see how it gets really dark near the bottom. I dipped that in a couple of times. Let's do it in front of the, you can see it was darker at the bottom than it is at the top. That's one way you can get some variation. If you want it to be like the same solid color, just dump it in the dye and stir it. I usually start with toothbrushes so I can pick it up. But I'm just going to put it in here, but don't leave things in too long. And especially make sure that your heat is on low. You don't want to damage your pieces. All right. Okay, so this is getting, I don't know how well you can see it. Okay, there we go. That's kind of nice. And you can see that happened quick. If you're already experienced with any kind of dyeing, this is going to seem very familiar. Yeah, take a peek there, David. Thank you. All right. One of the cool things about nylon is that it almost has this like bleeding effect. And I'm going to do this here. And I'm going to put it right in here. And it happens a little differently if it's wet versus when it's dry. So I put this in and I went into that line and you can see it's kind of a sharp line. Now, if it was wet and I go in, it kind of will bleed out. Sorry, I have to work fast with this, but you can see how it ended up really lighter because it was wet already. Okay, I'll try that. All right, hang on. Yeah, maybe we should have some paper towels over here too so that we can see. All right. And so the nylon, it's possible to also overlap colors. Okay. And what I like to do with these is I like to keep the middle parts light and then on the edge, this gives you a kind of a gradient. We're going to keep rinsing. And then while I'm at it, I'll also run and take it under running water as well. Sometimes we'll brush it out a little bit. It doesn't do too much, but you can take it back if you put it into clean water that's hot, and you can lighten it up a tiny bit. But usually once the dye is hot, it'll start to dye pretty quickly. And that's why it's important to work fast and to keep nearby your rinse, to keep your rinse nearby so that you can keep an eye on the gradient and control it as it gets darker. If I wanted something really dark, I would dip it multiple times instead of leaving it sit in. So that's for nylon. Some of you may work in nylon. I know we've got the nylon at the library, and then we also have the option of ordering things through Shapeways or Xometry. So that's what I got for dyeing, and I'm going to move to painting and finishing in a couple minutes here. I'll show you that. But do we have any questions about the dyeing before we get started? We can do this at school. We only have one hot plate, so you can only work at with one dye at a time. I did want to show you guys what happens when you dye with multiple colors. This is an example of a multiple color piece, and so is my profile picture on this. So I dipped this whole thing in yellow, and then I dipped the ends only in red, and you can see how it kind of bleeds out. It almost looks airbrushed. So that's one technique. This was done with reds and blues. Same sort of idea. Okay. But I just wanted to show you guys those real fast. Okay, so next we're going to work with a couple more of these. I'm going to show you now. I guess we should work over here. Okay, so what's super important if you're painting, and actually this should happen before you dye too, is that you need to have really clean, nice surfaces. Your surfaces, if you look really close on this, you'll see that we have a lot of those little nubs. We're all familiar with Form 2 at this point, and we understand how the support structure attaches to our 3D print. And then we take the little clippers from the tool room and we cut off all those little pieces. Well, if we want to do a nice finish job on these really need to be sanded, filed and sanded. So I would use, a basic file. This is a pretty simple, a simple form. Okay, and does anybody else have their sound on? Because I'm sort of hearing an extra, I wonder if it's me. So here I'm taking off those little nubs and I'm sanding. We would normally do this on a bench pen, but I'm using a file to get off those basic little nubs. And then I would go with sandpaper. I'd probably start with a finer sandpaper. You don't want to start with rough sandpaper on a 3D print because the plastic, you can sand through it before you even know it. So I usually start with like 400, 600. I like to finish with 1,000 or 1,200. We get a really nice finish there. And this is one of the things that you have to think about when you're designing, because if you have a whole lot of details that are going to get lost when you go to sand off the support structure, then you might want to think about a different way of making what it is you want to do, because we do have to clean off these pieces. Now, it's also possible with the preform software to change the way that your support structure touches your piece. You have to have some support structure, but it is also possible, and you can talk to our 3D print tech right now is Casey Newberg. We can talk to Casey about how the support structure is attached, so that when you go to clean it up, the parts that you have to clean up might be more simple, like this with the flat spots. So you'll need to use, just like if you were sanding or filing metal, obviously an interior curve like this should have a round or half round file, an oval file, fish belly. And then the flat parts, you should be using a flat file. And then of course you want to go over the last parts with some abrasive paper, and you want to get it to a really fine finish. The finer, the more time you spend on, and you can shoot down to here, the more time you spend on your finishing before you get any paint on is going to make or break the whole finish. Because if you leave these little nubs on, if when they break off, there's little things like, see this little tiny dent here? I don't know if you can, it's kind of, this won't focus that close. So if you leave that, then when you go to start painting and priming, that will show up like you wouldn't believe. So one of the things that you can do is you can use filler. You can use resin and cure it. There's also some different products that you can use as a filler. I want to investigate them more. I saw some for sale and then promptly forgot where I saw them. I'll ask Doug because I'm sure that he's aware of them. But you can use a little plastic filler in that spot. You can do it epoxy resin, but you want your surfaces to be nice and smooth before you start painting. You can also, if you need to, like we do with the wax 3D prints from Form, you can use stuff like the Wolf tools, and you can maybe just scrape away some of the parts that are in your way. You know, these little nub guys. I keep calling them little nubs. The little warts that the support structure leaves. So I would normally do this on a bench pin and supported. You can see there how I'm scraping. And there we go. So that I got rid of that little guy. Your best tools for seeing whether your finish is ready to paint are your fingers. Just rub your fingers on. I can still feel a lot of roughness there. I would get another flat file maybe and go here. I'm on a half round. And actually, if you look in, you can kind of see that, you know, there's this isn't the best print or the best finish. All right, so in looking at that, and I'll bring these pieces in on Monday so you can actually look at them as well. So the next step after we get the 3D print part nice and smooth, we've, you know, checked all the spots, is if we're going to paint it, we need to prime it. It should get a basic finish on it that we can start to build up other layers. I've got a white primer that I like to use. I like white because it gives me the base that I like to work with as far as color. You can also use gray primer. It kind of depends on what direction you're going with your colors, but I'll show you here. This is what I'm using, Krylon. It's a primer and color. You can just get primer, but I primed these two earlier, and you can see, hopefully, the how you can still see a little bit of the build lines. You can definitely see here the way it was sitting on the surface that I painted it on. But in the back here, we've got a lot going on here as far as these nicks in the form, and the primer just really makes them stick out. That's something to really keep in mind. And now at this point, we could paint. Okay, I've got two of these, and we can use a spray paint. If we spray paint, we'll want to mask any area that we don't want. But what's really important, besides, you know, masking and all that, it's like, oh, well, maybe I could just spray that part and not worry about that. No. You want to practice. Test parts. Save everything that you print. Save all the bases for your, when you take off the support structure and you have those rafts, save those rafts. They're great because you can prime them and you can test your paint on them and see how they look. So I got a couple different kinds of paint, and I'm going to grab them. And let me show you. Actually, let me show you. I'm going to take this outside just for a minute, and I'm going to put a little priming on. You know, it's not really ready. But but again, when you use spray paint, we have a paint booth down in Foundations. Most of you guys should be familiar with that already. If you're not, then let me know. I'll walk you down there so you can see how to get in there. It's important that you not spray paint just in an enclosed area. It's very bad for your lungs, your brain, etc. Or paint outside. That's a problem right now because it's wintertime, and you really should have, like, I think it's 60 degree, 55 degrees. So it should be at 55 and up. So that's important for spray paint in general. Okay, I'm going to show you a little bit of just painting here. Do I have a, all right. So now the next step, and again, I've got some of these like nicks in the side here on this guy. This isn't the greatest paint job, but you know, it's good for demo purposes. But there's a lot of different paints out there you can use. There's these. Okay, these are testers. They're great. People use them to paint small models. I also found this stuff that's made by testers. These are like oil-based paints though. So when you use these, you have to use them in a well-ventilated area. You also need to have paint thinner for cleaning your brushes and for cleanup. And here again, I'm going to pull out more paper towels. I waste so many paper towels when I'm dyeing, but it's okay. The other thing you can use is you can use the paper kind of stuff like we use at school. Actually, let me put these this way. So we're going to take this, and just like with the when you work with spray paint, you want to make sure your paints are all well stirred. Otherwise, you'll end up maybe just pulling pigment off the top or the solvent off the top. All right. And again, I'm going to put gloves on. Gloves are super important. Thank you, David. I appreciate your help. It's great to have my own cameraman. And I'm lucky he's not working today. So, all right. Again, I'm going to shake up, make sure the lid's always on before you shake up. And okay, can we see okay? All right, I've got a couple of, oh, and I did want to get a little container for, oh, here. I save these caps. I use them for all kinds of little stuff like, you know, alcohol, or if I'm cleaning small parts, they're great. I'm going to put a little bit of paint thinner in that. I'm using paint thinner for this. It's also possible to use water-based paints. You can use acrylic. The main thing that really gives you a good finish is to work in thin layers, which means you should have multiple layers. You should have maybe even a couple of layers of prime, a couple layers of, you know, your base coats. And this is all going to depend on what your particular color scheme is. We'll be thinking about this more also with the next project, but I wanted you guys to start thinking about things. So here we go. I got a lot of brush strokes here with this. I'm gonna do that. But you can see that I would have been better off going with, see what happens if I thin it a little, flatten it out, should. All right, now that's really thin. But this will give me more control. Okay. Letting the primer show through a little bit. Okay. So there's that versus if we went straight from the bottle. And although going straight from the bottle might cover the paint better, you can really see the, you know, the brush marks, as opposed to here we have just, it's just color. All right, I'm gonna try and clean up this brush here. Okay. And there's that. Now, I also wanted to use a little bit of acrylic so you could see what that does too. Where'd my acrylic go? Oh. And, I figure I picked up the acrylic box with the fewest. There we go. All right. Yeah, I've got, this is, and also generally you shouldn't work out of the bottle. I'm going to just put a little bit on the counter here because my counter is very cleanable. What I like about having a stone counter. All right, so I've got a nice brush here. We've got a little bit of the acrylic paint. And I'm going to go and, again, we've got that same issue of paint strokes or brush strokes that show in the paint. I'd be better off if I thinned this a little. And with acrylic, I can thin that with water. So I'm going to get a little water. Hang on. So, I also get water ice, and I love saving these containers. They're great. So I'm going to just take a little bit of water, thin down this acrylic, and we're going to look at that and see how well that does. There are different applicators you could use too, obviously, besides a brush. You can also use sponges, paper towels. All right, so this is the thinned acrylic. And then over here is the acrylic straight out of the jar here. It's kind of thick. All right. So you guys will be able to look at this test piece when I bring it in on Monday. All right, I'm going to clean up my brush there. I'm going to dip this other guy in here. Any questions so far? Obviously, you know, we'll get into this with you guys individually as you start to color things. But it's important to think about what your options are for colors as you move towards that part of your design. Yeah, I think that that's probably good for where we're at this point. So I'm going to stop there. And I'm going to get back on regular Zoom and not just my phone. So I can, you know, see you guys, and we'll do some one-on-ones. We'll do breakout rooms. I will save these pieces. I'll probably do some more test work on my other primed piece. And because I have some other paints that I picked up a color shift from testers that I saw at Michael's and I thought would be really fun to play with. And what that is that's the that's this gloss black base coat, and then this color shift that changes from like purple to blue. Really fun. I'm really looking forward to that. So, all right, hang on. I'm gonna why don't you we'll turn off the video on this, and I'll yeah. Thank you, David. Okay, I'm gonna shut the video off on this, and we'll head over to the other guy.
I'll stay here until you're sure you're good.
Okay, thank you. All right, and let me go here. And yeah. All right, here we go. Oof. Leave that room. Okay. All right, I guess that I was the echo. I do apologize, folks. Okay, so we are back at the regular, our normal Zoom here. And any questions before I stop this recording about the demos, or if there's any other things? I will be bringing in a lot of these supplies so we can work on things on Monday if anybody has any questions, although we do have some other stuff to get done there.
I have a question.
Yes, Candace.
Do we have to prime before we like do the dipping technique if we want to boil the dye?
No.
Okay.
No. Dyeing happens. That's a good question.
Dyeing happens right onto the, oh, hang on, my cat just got, excuse me, here,
Hey,
hold on.
Barb. Hey,
Yes,
Barb.
yes.
We're having a lot of feedback. It sounds like vocal fry or something. I don't know on your mic.
Oh, crap. Okay. I appreciate you pointing that out. Let me see here. Can I find my other, yeah, I started to notice that earlier. Hang on a second, guys. Sounds very bad. Thank you. Yeah, do you have, hang on, we're going to swap out headphones. I'm going to,
Okay. All right. So we're resuming the recording. So Candace asked about whether we had to prime before dyeing. If you're dyeing a piece, you can dye once your piece is cleaned up enough to be finished, then you can dye. Dyeing is usually like the last thing that you do. Oh, and I see that we have Joe there. Okay. Dyeing is like the last thing you do in the finish if you're dyeing. And remember, dyeing is that hot liquid, and it basically is absorbed into the actual plastic. Whereas when you're painting, you're putting a finish on top of the plastic. That's why you need to spend a lot of time making sure that the plastic finish is smooth, or at the very least the way that you want it. I mean, maybe you might not want it smooth, but you should have reasons for that. If you want to leave it not smooth, or maybe make it not smooth. You could also look at other ways of finishing your plastic, your 3D printed plastic. We've got options around the studio too. You can brush things. It's important to make sure that they're clean and ready to accept paint before you prime it. So that the painting you have to prime, the dyeing you do not. Great question. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
So for the dye, is there like a website where we can get it, or we can just find it on Amazon?
You can find it on Amazon. Blick has a nice selection downtown. At least they used to. Last time I was down there, they did. With supply chains, nobody knows. I think that there may be some in the studio, but I'm not sure. There may not be also. But yeah, you can totally get it online. You can get it even at craft stores sometimes. Fabric,
Okay.
Joanne. It would surprise me if Joanne Fabrics didn't have some, but don't expect a big selection. You get your best selection online, because the dye poly comes in like lots of colors, lots and lots.
Okay.
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 They still have a really big section in Blick.
They do? Oh, good.
Yeah, just
good.
make sure you don't get the natural dye. Make sure you
Exactly.
yeah.
Yes, totally. I made that mistake early on when I first started dyeing things. And I was like, what the heck? I mean, it wasn't working. It was hot. I was practically boiling the dye and nothing would set into that plastic. So yeah, make sure it's the dye poly. Ritz seems to have a little more play in terms of whether they have a natural and a synthetic dyes, but the RIT is liquid, and some people just use the straight RIT liquid. It's not something I have a lot of experience with, but I think that James Betts in the studio uses that. So he's one that we could talk to a little bit about this too, and maybe I could even have him stop in. He's actually teaching a class at the same time as this one, so I don't know whether he'd be able to do that, but I know that he uses some of the other dyes as well. Any other questions?
I do have one more.
Sure, no problem.
Would gesso be a option to use?
Gesso kind of counts as a primer.
Okay.
But I would say I'm not so sure. Do test parts, because with gesso has a lot more body than so one of the things that and I'm not sure if I got this when talking about the primer, but you want the primer, you probably want to do like a couple of layers. Like the pieces that I was showing you, I put like maybe 3 coats
let it dry a little in between, maybe 15, 20 minutes, put another coat on. It's best to work up with thin coats when you're creating a finish than a thick coat. And gesso to me always feels really thick. Now, maybe you could water it down and it'd be better. I know we use gesso with copper when we're using for color, sometimes with colored pencils, and you're able to use gesso as a primer on metal. But I've never actually worked with it with 3D prints. It might be worth a test.
Thank you.
No problem. No problem. Any others? Okay. All right. If that's all of it, then I guess what we'll do is we'll start in with our breakouts. We still have an hour and a half of class left, and we want to talk about our pieces. So I'm going to stop this recording here.